Hello everyone in New Ulm. This is LeRoy Tanner, Programming and Technology Services Librarian at the New Ulm Public Library, and we're here in Village Arts and Pottery with potter Ron Kahler. He's going to be demonstrating for us some basic throwing techniques and showing us some of the work that he does here in his studio. So let's join him over there.
The first thing that we have to do when we're going to throw pots is have the clay, and my clay comes in 25-pound pre-mixed packages, and since I'm going to show you basic throwing techniques, my belief is that all forms come from the form called a cylinder. And so what I wanted to do this morning is show you what's important about cylinders. Start with a small piece of clay, which if you're a beginner, that's the way that you would want to start. And we'll go over hand position, wheel position. We'll go over what parts of your body are important in being successful in throwing. The first thing that I always do is, here's 25 pounds. And my goal would be, if you were one of my students, to have you create a pot which is a 4 to 6 inch cylinder out of 1 pound of clay. And so in order to get 1 pound of clay, we cut 25 pounds into 4 pieces. And I'm not an engineer, I am not mechanical, so I don't care if it's exactly or if it's not exactly. Here's 6 pounds of clay. If you cut it 6 pounds, theoretically you have 6 1-pound pieces. So I'm going to cut 2 pounds off, and then I'm going to cut the last 4 pounds into 2. Once we have the clay, we have to get it into a ball. And we need to get it into a ball for 2 reasons. One is we need to get the spirits of the clay going in a circle, because the wheel's going to go in the circle, and a square or rectangle does not work very well in a circular format. So we're going to do what we call wedging or kneading the clay. It's exactly what Mom, Grandma, Great-Grandma did when they used to make bread by hand. And so the way that I start is I take the rectangular part, and I go down, and as I go down, I turn. 3 reasons that I want to do this. One is get the spirits of the clay going in a circular motion so that they'll want to work with me. The other is to get the air out, get any excess moisture out. This bench is simply a piece of unfinished plywood. Some people also put burlap over it. I choose just to do it like that. So you go in a rotating motion, and then I bring it around. Pound it into the ball. Take the bottom, and it'll look like this. Take the other one, do the same thing. And as it goes round and round, bring the edges in, or the ends in. And you're right, I make it look really easy. It may not be the first few times that you try. And again, the purpose is to get the air out and to reduce the amount of moisture. The reason you have to get the air out is if you don't, then when the kiln or when the clay is heated up in the firing process, which turns it from clay to stone and from stone to a glazed piece, the air has to escape, and it will explode. And it will break that pot and probably everything that's in and around it. And the part that's sad is that it never happens to the pots you don't like. It always happens to your favorite piece. So here's 4 balls that we're going to start with. In order to throw pots, you need some very basic tools. Some are expensive, some are really cheap. The expensive one is your potter's wheel. And when I first started making pots back when I was in college, I had a kick wheel. And so with a kick wheel, there would have been a bigger wheel down here, shaft connecting the two, and you did a kicking motion so that the wheel went round and round. And as it died down, you had to kick harder. And it was great for smaller pots. It was very difficult for larger pots. And of course, after we make hundreds of small pots, we always think that we want to make larger pots. So in the Western world, our potter's wheels go counterclockwise. And that's really important to know, and that's really important to understand, because that's what dictates your hand position. This is variable speed. You have a foot feed just like in the car down here. You want I use a bat, which is simply a pre-cut piece of plastic with 2 holes in it. And there's 2 little metal notches on the wheel that adhere the bat to it. You want your bat head or your throwing head moist. You do not want it wet, because if it's wet, the clay will not stick to it and you'll be really frustrated. Put it in the middle. It starts going counterclockwise. Now, initially, the techniques of throwing pots are just very technical and are very much physics. We already wedged the clay, but we need to do it one more time on the wheel. So when we do it on the wheel, we put our hands down, and if you notice, my elbows are on my legs, my arms are in close to my body, because it's very much an upper body motion. And if you can't control your body, then everything's going to go like this, and you can't get the clay to do what you want to do. So you have to be able to hold your arms against your body, make it rigid, and make it so that the clay has one place to go, which is where your hands are. So in order to do that, you get it going, you begin to squeeze at the bottom, and you squeeze and you lift, and if you don't lift while you squeeze, it'll break off. So, hands are at the bottom, squeeze them together, and you simply lift. Then, your left hand always, 100% of the time, when you're trying to center clay, goes on the outside. And the reason that does is because the clay is going counterclockwise, your hand is here, the palm of your hand then resists the motion coming in, and so the clay doesn't have any choice but to do whatever your hand does. Put your left hand on the outside, right hand on top. As you're pushing down with your right hand, you're pushing in with your left hand, and it's in center. So here we go again. Initially I squeeze the two together, but I lift my hands so that they aren't in one place, and you can actually, the other advantage of doing this is you can feel the clay get dense and thick rather than mealy. And you want it dense and thick so that you're going to be able to work with it and create what you want in just a minute. Then, down with your right hand, but at the same time, in with your left hand. And it's very important, if you notice on my hand here, there's clay here, but this is smoother because it's on the bottom of the wheel and it's pushing in, which dries out the clay. So once the clay is in center, we're ready to open it up. And so to open it, again, left hand on the outside, right hand on the other side, and make just a slight indentation. Advantage of the indentation is it's the center, and it's also going to hold some water. And you take your hands are like this, you take your thumbs, you push down, and as you push down, you turn your thumbs in. Now, the goal is you want this to be 4 to 6 inches high. You want it about 3 to 4 inches across, and across the bottom and up the walls, you want it to be 1/4 inch thick, top to bottom. So we got the hole in. Again, now instead of on the outside, the left hand goes inside. And if you're right-handed, it's going to take some time to get used to be ambidextrous and have the use of both hands. So the left hand goes inside, you squeeze this together, and as you squeeze it together, you pull slightly, and the bottom of the clay will open. Voila, there you go. Basic tools for throwing. You have a loop tool, you have a needle tool, and you have 1 or 2 wood tools. I do most of my work with the small wood tool, which the end is cut at a 45-degree angle. Once you have the clay open, then you lightly squeeze it back. And the reason you do that is it makes a little indentation on the inside, a hump down here, and that gives you something to be able to hold on to. Squeeze gently and lift. So here we go. Let's see if we can do it. You want a little bit of water. You don't want too much water because you don't want the clay to absorb all the water. Come back, squeeze at the bottom, and you can actually see the clay rise. Now, here's something else that's really important. When you throw pots and you're squeezing and lifting the clay, it always goes, the top will go toward your nose. So you want to make sure that you try and keep your head right over the top. And the interesting thing is, if you're golfers, you always want your nose right over the top of the ball when you're going to putt. Very same principle. Okay, we've made 3 pulls. Now, I make primarily functional utilitarian ware. And I have found that the best thing that you can do is have a little extra thickness at the top, because if it's utilitarian, if this is going to become a mug, if you have it really thin, when you glaze it and fire it, it becomes glass. If it's really thin, somebody could very easily cut the corners of their mouth and they aren't going to be very happy with you. So, the way that I make it, that I compress it and make it thicker is I take a 4-inch by 1.5-inch piece of chamois. I wrap it around and I squeeze and press, and that way I have the type of top that I want. So we come in, take the wood tool. It's at a 45-degree angle. Take the excess off, put that aside, and now we got to see if I can do what I said. So, take the wire tool. We have loop tool, needle tool, wood tool, sponge, chamois, and wire tool. And we want to see if we're as close to 1/4 of an inch as possible, and voila, it is. Now, the reason that that's so important is you don't want it to be so heavy that you can't hold the liquids or whatever might be in it. We're going to take another pound piece, and we already know that it's a pound because we measured it. Years of experience. We slap it down. We're wedging the clay on the wheels so that we can make it thicker, denser, get more of the air out of it. Important to move your hands while you're doing it. If they stay in one place, then it'll break off. Left hand is always on the outside. Right hand is always on top. Let's see what would happen if we take that pound cylinder, instead of leaving it in a cone shape. Let's spread it out a little. The wider the bottom is, the shorter it's going to be. Put the 2 thumbs in. Switch to the left hand is always on the inside. If you do it the other way, you're not going to be able to get any height out of it because you're going against the clay. You go against the clay to center. You go with the clay to be able to pull it and to throw. And again, we want to keep that top compressed. Squeeze and lift. Compress the top. Go back down. Keep the clay moist. And you can only pull as fast as your wheel's going. And if you're doing utilitarian wear, you want the lip or the rim to be thicker, compressed, and round, so that if you ever choose to use it, you do not cut yourself once it's finished. Trim the excess. Run the needle tool under it, slice it, take the excess off, take your sponge, get the excess water off, trim and cut 1/4 of an inch. So let's explore briefly a little bit larger ball of clay, and let's see what other shapes besides just a cylinder might come from that cylinder. Everything's the same. Left hand on the outside, right hand on top. When you're wedging it, squeeze together and lift. Press down with your right hand, in with your left hand. And the other thing that you have to keep in mind is when you're throwing cylinders and or taller forms, you're going against centrifugal force, where if you're throwing plates and or bowls, you're going with centrifugal force, and so it becomes a whole lot easier. Okay, slight indentation, just enough water to moisten it. Press in with both thumbs, pressing down. If you want to know if you have a 1/4 of an inch or not, the way that you can judge that is once you've opened it as far as you would like, take your needle tool, stick in, pull out, got a 1/4 of an inch. Extremely important that the bottom of your pot is even and is the same thickness from center to side. If it's not, when it dries, it'll probably crack out on you because it dries unevenly. And I probably spend far more time making sure that the bottom of my pot has the same thickness from center to side than I do anything else, because there's no sense in making some beautiful form if the bottom's going to be uneven and it cracks out on you at a later time. And you know, the interesting thing is that never happens to the pots you really don't care about. It only happens to the best of anything that you've done. So, left hand inside, right hand outside, squeeze, lift. Want your nose over the top. You have it as high as you might desire. Still important that the lip stays condensed and round. So we have a wider cylinder, but let's see if we're still close to a 1/4 of an inch top to bottom. Another thing that's really important that I oftentimes catch myself forgetting to do is when you're throwing, breathe. Don't hold your breath, breathe. Holding your breath just makes it all far more difficult. Okay, 1/4 of an inch, top to bottom. And that's always the goal no matter how tall it might be. Sometimes it can be helpful to take your tool. Always want to make sure your bat's on. Take your tool, get rid of the excess clay. Throw it down, and again we squeeze and we lift. And if you'll notice, I kept my hands in one place too long and almost took it off. So now we got to put it back on. And again, squeeze, lift, left hand on the outside, right hand on top. And that's because the wheel's going counterclockwise, and it's just simple physics. You try and do it the other way, it won't work. People in Asia and the Orient throw just the opposite. Theirs going clockwise, so the Japanese, the Korean, the Chinese, the hands are just the opposite. But in Europe, in the United States, we do left hand on the outside, right hand on top. And if you're right-handed, that will be very unnatural until you get used to it. And it takes lots of time to get used to it.
Ron, you mentioned that you started throwing pots when you were in college. After you got out of college, how did you continue to practice and work on your pottery?
Well, I threw my first pot when I was 14 years old. And I went to college to become a painter. And when I got to college, I couldn't take a painting class because they were all full. And I started throwing pots, and the rest is history. The way that I continued my craft was I was an art teacher for 10 years, and I was also a professional potter. Had my own studio, my own business, all of that. So here's one other thing that we can do with the cylinder. And my nose is off to the side because that's the way I want the pot to go. And as this bowl takes its form, it is not going to be 1/4 of an inch on the bottom because I want to come back after it's leather hard, which means it'll hold its own shape and it can be handled and cut off the wheel and everything. I want to come back, turn it upside down, trim the excess off, and cut a foot into it. Okay, here we go. Last pull. So in the course of my lifetime, LeRoy, I have taught pottery kindergarten through junior college. And reality is that we're going to make the bowl look a little more decorative. I have been around pots and or throwing for the last 54 years. Now, given I'm only 35, I mean, you know, that makes it hard to believe.
Well, we'll keep your secret.
Please do.
Do you have a favorite shape that you like to throw?
Yes, my favorite shape is large, bulbous shapes that can also be covered jars. And it's been really interesting. Since we went on Shelter and Protect back in March, I think that started on the 18th. On the 20th of March, I went to the cities, bought 1,500 pounds of clay. And for me, being locked into place was the house and the shop. And I started throwing pots. And at the end of April, had thrown 1,200 pounds of clay, went back to the cities, and it was really neat. They do this curbside thing. You back in, you call them, they load it all up for you. Oh, it's wonderful. And you drive home and you unload it and you start it again. And so I've spent a lot of time during the pandemic creating new forms, etc. And again, it's 1/4 of an inch top to bottom. When I say there will be a foot, that means that this comes in and this all gets cut out. And in the last 9-10 weeks, I have created pieces that are, excuse me, by far the best I've ever done. When I say I've thrown pots for 54 years, I threw from the time I was 19 until the time I was 32, changed careers, quit throwing for 30 years, and came back to it 5 years ago, and that's when the studio was built, and that is when I started pursuing it as more than an interest, pursued it as a hobby, pursued it as an avocation. We go to shows, sales, etc. It's called Village Arts and Pottery because my life partner is a silversmith trained in Cairo, Egypt, and is also a quilter and fiber artist trained in Egyptian applique by the Bedouins in Egypt. So now let's go from 1 pound and 2 pounds to 6 pounds. And let's see if there's a couple different things that we can do with 6 pounds. These are thrown from cylinders. Absolutely everything in this shop that you can see, whether it's on these shelves or these shelves, have come from some form of cylinder. The more clay, the more difficult. But the principles are the same. Left hand on the outside, both hands together, squeeze and lift, then left hand on the outside pushing in while the right hand is pushing down. And as much as it may want to go differently than that, reality is the clay has one choice if you keep your arms rigid and still. Go into the form that you force it into. And And if you don't like to get your fingernails dirty and you don't like stuff sticking to your hands, you're probably not going to like being a potter. Okay, this time left hand's on the inside, right hand's on the outside. I want to spread this out, so I'm going to press down harder than I'm pressing in. But right hand's up top, left hand's on the outside. Now, I'm going to start keeping the sponge in my hand because I want the inside to stay moist while I pull all of this into a big, narrow, open area. So here we go. And I don't know about you, but my middle finger is longer than my third finger. That makes it extremely difficult to not have a ridge when I'm pulling. Have to keep the top thick, and I'm going to condense it down so that it comes into this other thicker part of the clay. And I simply do that by supporting and by pushing. If you could better see the inside of here, the bottom of this cylinder is going like this. It's in a small dome. So now the task becomes, how do I spread that dome out so that that bottom is completely straight across and the same thickness, because if we don't do that, what will happen? The bottom cracks out, and we don't want to do that. So you press down gently and you move your hand out. That brings it to the outside wall. It blends it in with the outside wall. You do it again. And you have to make sure that you're pulling, or I'm sorry, that you're pressing and move your hands at the same speed and with the same pressure as it goes. Okay, the bottom is even and equal. Now, here comes the problem. What are we going to do with all of this clay? And one of the questions that is often asked of me is, do I have something in mind when I start to throw? And the answer to that 100% of the time is yes. So I'm going to bring all of this in, but I'm going to, instead of my fingertips and instead of using my sponge, I'm going to switch to my knuckle. And that allows me to bring and to pull more clay. And if you stop to add water, it's really important to go back where you left off. And you have to keep your pressure the same, or that top is going to get really thin while the bottom is really thick, and that does not work well. You want everything, no matter how big that pot is, to remain at that 1/4 inch, top to bottom. Okay, here we go. If you notice, my arms are right against my body. Don't forget to breathe. Now, this down in here is thicker than this up here, so we have to pull the bottom to catch up with the top. We squeeze in at the bottom, we squeeze in on the inside. You can see it lifting. And suddenly, we have a large serving bowl. And if you notice, as I'm pulling this last part, the speed of the wheel has slowed down considerably. There we go. Now, I'm going to flare this top slightly, but I'm going to do something else with it. I'm going to take my wet chamois and I'm going to wrap it around so that it's round, and so that it's thick and dense. And one of the forms that I've been working with the last couple weeks, I call split lip or split rim forms. And here's the way we're going to do that. We're going to make this into two. So one lip is going to have two parts. And now I quit breathing. And now I breathe again because it worked. Okay, so if you could see this, this lip now has two pieces. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in with a horseshoe shape on the inside and my finger on the outside, and I'm going to squeeze that together and I'm going to make that lip look like this. And then I'm going to come directly across on the other side. I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to do it here, and then I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to do it here. Make sure that the bottom's even. And I have something that looks like this.
Now, Ron, when you're trying out a new technique or a
that's pretty much instantaneous. I mean, it's not a matter of getting comfortable with the regular motion. It's a matter of, do I like it? Don't I like it? The first one I did a few weeks ago, I just simply did as 4. And then I decided that, well, let's see what happens if we get more of a flower shape, because that was more pleasing to me than just being divided into 4. And I've really liked that. And initially I had so that there were 8, and then I decided that, you know what, I like 6. And every now and then I will get 7. So nice thing about the wheel is it comes apart. We need to get this excess right here off. And then this will sit until it's leather hard, which means hold its own shape. And it takes longer, since plastic doesn't absorb water, it takes longer for the bottom to dry than the top, which is fine, because once the bottom is dry or drier, you don't want it to completely dry out, then I can turn it upside down and I can trim away like I did that other piece, and it'll all hold its shape. It can be extremely difficult when it starts to get dry to cut it free, so I always choose to cut it free at this point, and now as it starts to dry, that allows it to shrink evenly rather than the bottom stays and the top doesn't. This then would simply go over here to dry, and it's horrible drying weather, so probably sometime tomorrow that will be dry enough to cut free, set on, allow the bottom to sit just on the wood, absorb more water, and probably, what's today, Friday? Sunday sometime, it would work to turn it upside down and trim the foot in. On the floor behind me, there's a stack of bats. Would you grab one for me?
Sure. There you go.
Thanks, sir. And again, if you noticed, when I was pulling, left hand was on the inside, right hand was on the outside, and that's because when your wheel's going counterclockwise, and I realized that looking at the video, it may look like it's going the other way, but reality is it's going counterclockwise, and you cannot do what I just did by trying to get your hands to go the other way, because it works against the clay. And once you get it open and you start to pull, then you always want to make sure that you're working with the clay, because it just won't work otherwise.
And besides cleaning the bats, what other kinds of maintenance does the pottery wheel usually take?
None. This is 50 years old. And it's been drugged from southern Iowa to western Minnesota, and I mean, it just always goes along. Sometimes people will say, well, how much does it cost to start making pot? These tools, anywhere from $2 to $6. The wheel is one of your largest investments, and I think today, when I bought this back in the 70s, I want to say it was $500 or $600, and today it's somewhere between $1,800 and $2,500. And then your most expensive investment is a kiln, and the bigger the kiln, the more expensive, And it would be my opinion that if you're ever going to buy a kiln, you want to buy a large one, because there's not a resale market for smaller ones. So if you start with a small one and suddenly you've outgrown it, you have something to collect dust in the garage. And it's a whole lot easier to have a kiln that is too big in the garage that it just takes longer to fill with pots than one that's going to be too small. Because it still takes 6 to 10 hours to fire. So do you want to fire a big one for 6 or 10 hours, or do you want to fire a small one for 6 or 10 hours? Okay, here we go. If you've noticed, you don't need lots of water. You need wet hands. Squeeze in. And I usually start by squeezing these in 2 or 3 places, but then I bring it back and I bring it all together and I lift. Then right hand on top, left hand on the outside. Push down and push in. And it's extremely important to do both with equal pressure. Otherwise, you're not going to get a cone, you're just going to get it all splattered out, and it may or may not be in center. And the way that you tell that it's in center is it's not wobbling. So here, this is all in center, this is out of center. And this particular bat is saying, I don't want to cooperate, I want to do what I want to do, and I'm not going to go. And that's that knocking that you hear. The bat's just a little bit loose on the plug that it sits on. Okay, but we still have it in center. Again, thumbs go together, they turn in. You push down. Left hand inside, right hand outside to support what you're doing. And I want it to be taller, so I'm not going to open it real far. I'm only going to open it 3 or 4 inches. But the problem with that is, or the task of that is, all this clay has to come up here. Want the bottom to be even. If you see, the top comes out, so we have to come back and we have to put it back in, and then we have to keep the top compressed.
What shape do you have your hand inside the pot?
I have my hand slightly above my outside knuckle because all I'm trying to do is pull it up. Okay, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to pull up one more because it's a little bit thicker from here to here than what I want it to be. Now here comes the task to get it as thick as I want, but not too thin, because if I get it too thin, it will not support the weight of the rest of the clay above it. We probably have it at about 10 or 12 inches would be my guess. Might be just a little bit more. Now, you don't want to let the water pool on the bottom, because that makes the bottom really weak. And yes, I put my right hand on the inside to get the water out. That's the only time the right hand goes on the inside. It does not ever go on the inside. It's not like this. It's like this. If I was trying to pull like this, it won't work because I'm going against the clay, which is what we want to do if we want to center it. It's not what we want to do if we want to make some type of form. Well, let's see if we can get it into something like this. Okay? Put a little bit of water on the inside, and I want my left hand wet. I'm going to start at the bottom. Now, my hand's like this on the inside. Okay? So it's going to be like this. All this is going to do is support it. Theoretically, and not even theoretically, I know that I can do the whole form with just my left hand, but I want more support than just my left hand. So we're down at the bottom, we're right here, and I'm going to start to gently push out. And as I push out, I'm also still thinning the wall. Right hand's going inside to take the water out, of which there's very little. Then I'm going to take this and just pretend it's a pot of its own right now. Give it a form. Take my okay, here we go. Let's try it again, see what happens. Again, I want my right hand on the outside, I want my left hand wet. I'm going to start right here. Gonna do one more. I'm gonna start where I left off right here. There we go. So all of this is excess clay, and I will take that off at this point in time. And I keep this tool in close. If I don't, it'll all build clay like that, so I keep it in close. And when it will hold itself, I'll still have to come back and take the loop tool and trim this excess off from here to here, but I need that right now to support the weight of the wet clay above it and the shape, because the weight's not coming like this, it's coming like this, and as it comes like this, here's your pressure, so you need that extra. And so what we do in the world of pottery is we come back later and trim it down. So, what do you think? Want to try?
Well, thanks, Ron, for letting us come into your studio.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And we look forward to being able to have you come to the library and to town and be able to share your talents and experiences with us again.
That'd be great.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds super. Thanks, man.